ADS Racing Shocks now offers true bolt-on shock upgrades for your 2021 and up Ford Bronco. We offer coil-over kits to outfit your 2- or 4-door model equipped with 4-wheel drive. Vehicle-specific spring rates maintain your vehicle's balance and ride characteristics, while the increased suspension travel allows extra clearance for larger wheels and tires. And ADS does more than just shocks. We're the place for your Bronco suspension solutions with a variety of direct fit suspension components. Direct fit race shocks from ADS can help you take your Bronco's off-road performance to the next level. And to prove just how easy a true bolt-on shock upgrade can be, we'll install a set on our Badlands Bronco. Before starting the install, raise the rear tires of the vehicle off the ground and support the frame of the vehicle with jack stands. It's not required, but in order to give you a better view on camera, I'm going to go ahead and use the lift. Starting at the rear of the vehicle, loosen and remove the lug nuts, followed by the tire and wheel assembly. Loosen the lower shock mount bolt. In order to remove the bolt, you may have to place a jack under the rear axle and move it up or down to take the weight off. To access the top shock mount nuts, you'll need to first remove the fender liner by removing all the push pins and any screws that are securing it to the body. Loosen and remove the 3 nuts at the top of the shock. Go slowly, because once the last nut is removed, the shock will simply fall out. Since access is limited here once the shock is installed, go ahead and mount the driver's side rear remote reservoir bracket to the frame brace located just in front of the upper shock mounting bucket. There are holes already drilled in the frame that you can use to mount the bracket using the included carriage bolts. Go ahead and tighten the bolts now. Now we can install the 2.5-inch ADS race coilover. Our race shocks are built to withstand the most extreme conditions, giving you the stability and control to conquer the toughest terrains. Starting at the top, slide the shock into the upper mounting bucket and line up the 3 studs with the corresponding holes. Make sure that the fitting for the hydraulic hose is facing the rear of the vehicle. Now install the washers and nylock nuts under the 3 studs at the top, but don't tighten them yet. Once all 3 of the top nuts have been started, you can line up the bottom mount. Use the supplied spacers to ensure proper mounting between the rear bracket. Install the factory bolt through the mount, spacers, and shock, then install the nut on the other side. Again, you may need to move the axle up or down to help with the installation. Once that's done, go ahead and tighten everything up. Now slip one of the hose clamps over the remote reservoir and slide it over the bracket that we installed earlier. Install the other clamp to the opposite end and over the bracket. Loop the hose down and forward, positioning the compression adjuster on the reservoir upward for easy adjustment. Once you have everything on the rear installed, double check and make sure that it's tight and torqued to spec. If you plan to reinstall the rear fender liner in your vehicle, you'll need to do some minor trimming in this area to provide extra clearance around the reservoir and allow access to the adjuster. A quick markup and a pair of scissors will make short work of the job. Finish it off by reinstalling the screws and the tabs that we removed earlier. Now we can remount the wheel and torque the lug nuts per the manufacturer's recommendation. And with the rear end all wrapped up, we can move up to the front shock. If you haven't already, raise the front tires of the vehicle off the ground and support the vehicle's frame with some jack stands. Once again, I'll be using the lift, but it isn't necessary to complete the job. Remove the lug nuts and the front wheel from the vehicle. Next, loosen the nut holding the upper control arm onto the spindle. With the nut loose, give the spindle a tap with a hammer and the upper control arm ball joint should pop right out of the spindle. And push the upper control arm up and out of the way. It may be necessary to loosen the A-arm cross bolt in order to move it up. To make removal of the factory shock easier, the 2 bolts holding the lower control arm to the frame can be removed. These bolts provide camber and caster adjustments, so make a mark on both of them before you remove them. This will help us get the suspension back close to spec and allow us to drive the vehicle to the alignment shop. Support the bottom of the spindle with a jack as you remove the lower A-arm bolts. Dropping the lower A-arm allows you a little extra clearance to remove the long factory shock studs that go through the lower A-arm. Next, loosen the 3 nuts found at the top of the shock. Once the nuts are removed, pry down on the lower control arm and push down on the factory shock at the same time, and you should be able to remove it. The ADS shocks don't use these studs, so once the factory shock has been removed, we can go ahead and reinstall the lower A-arm into its mounts and bolt it up. To help with reassembly, it may be easier to lower the upper control arm back into the spindle and loosely mount it. Line up the marks that you made before removal and tighten the nuts to spec. Now we can install our 2.5-inch direct fit ADS race coilover. First, line up the 3 studs with the holes in the upper mount. Install the washers and loosely start the top 3 lock nuts. Now install the 2 bottom bolts through the bottom shock mount and the lower control arm. Once the lower bolts are in place, add the washers and lock nuts, then tighten both the upper and lower shock mounting hardware and torque to spec. Mount the remote reservoir bracket to the top of the beam, located just behind the front bumper. I had to modify my bracket slightly and give it a bend at about a 45-degree angle for clearance in order to clear our aftermarket bumper. There are already holes in the beam that you can use to mount the bracket using the included carriage bolts. Now slip 1 hose clamp over the remote reservoir and slide the reservoir onto the bracket that we just installed. Move the clamp over the tang on the bracket, add the second clamp to the opposite end of the reservoir and slide it up over the end of the bracket as well. Make sure the reservoir is positioned so that you can access the compression adjuster on the end of the reservoir and that the fitting and hose is not rubbing or pinching on anything. Center the reservoir in the bracket and tighten the clamps. The high pressure hydraulic line will also need to be secured. Install the included clamp over the hose and use the screw to fasten it to the frame. Next, we can bring the upper control arm down and slide the ball joint back into the spindle. Then reinstall the nut and torque it to spec. Now we're ready to reinstall the wheel and torque the lug nuts to the manufacturer's spec. With the wheels back on, move the vehicle forward and back a couple of times to let the suspension settle in. Once you have everything installed and torqued to spec, we can start adjusting the coilovers. To do this, measure the height at all 4 corners of the vehicle in a straight line through the center of the wheel. Measure from the ground up to the lip of the fender flare. This will give you a good idea of how much each coilover needs to be adjusted up or down to level the ride height. Be sure to recheck the torque specs on all the fasteners after the first 50 miles of driving. Once the install is complete, your vehicle will need a professional alignment. Use the following values as targets for your suspension's geometry. Don't forget to get the rest of your suspension up to par by adding some fully adjustable control arms to the front and rear of your Bronco. ADS also carries adjustable panhard bars, heavy-duty fully adjustable sway bar links, and half-length tie rod ends to complete your suspension overhaul. So whether you're a seasoned off-road enthusiast or you're just starting out, bolt-on suspension upgrades from ADS are the perfect choice for enhancing your vehicle's off-road performance. To learn more about our full line of shocks and shock accessories, visit us at adsshocks.com.